Hi, this is Colm Bradley of Community Places. Colm, I've done several of these interviews now for the project we're working on with Slugger, but um, one sort of thing I've been impressed with a lot of people that I've talked to. Not just simply what they say, but the fruits of their labour, so to
Yes.
speak. But there's one thing that strikes me that there may be a bit of a problem here is that the capacity is often concentrated in very, very experienced, maybe 20 or 30-year-old community organisations who have capacity, skills, and competence that new starts may not have. I mean, is this a problem that you recognise, or am I exaggerating?
Well, I suppose like for new starts in terms of social enterprise, um, I suppose it's like any kind of business you're trying to start up. Um, is there a market for the business? What's the competition like? There's no reason why social enterprises should be free of competition. So you need to be sure of what your market is, what your catchment area is, and who the competitors are in that marketplace. For social enterprises, it's going to be the same.
So this idea that you can simply that an asset, a physical asset in itself, is is a panacea or an answer to a problem previously unstated.
Yeah.
Is this is another danger, perhaps?
Well, it depends what the problem is. Whether or not the asset is of value to you or not, and doesn't become a white elephant or doesn't distract you from your mission, which sometimes happens. But like there are plenty of examples of assets having been transferred or sold at kind of community value, or in some kind of lease arrangement, where the transfer has been to provide, a basic community facility, um, not something that was intended to spark a social enterprise growth as such, but was intended to meet a particular need at a particular time.
For example,
For example, community centres that I can think of, healthy living centres I can think of, women's centres would be an example in a number of places across the city. So the asset is to facilitate a community or voluntary organisation to provide a service to meet local needs. It's not like meant to be the beginning of growing a social enterprise per se. And those examples are just as valuable. And no one in the social enterprise sector would say otherwise.
as someone who's advised lots of groups over the years around some of these issues, if you're a non-incumbent kind of startup community group, so to speak, what would be your kind of sage advice?
Just like be very clear about why you need the asset, and start with what are we trying to achieve, obviously, and to what extent will the asset help us achieve that. So remain focused on your purpose, on your mission. Don't get distracted about with the glitz of having an asset as such. Um, there might be other models that you should consider, and that might be that you just manage the asset that belongs to local authority or somebody else, or it might be in some areas that we're working on at the minute. The local community groups are very clear; they don't want to own the asset. They want the council. In one case I can think of, they want the council to provide that asset. They want them to be jointly managed with the council, and that's the kind of negotiation that's going on. But they don't want to take on the responsibility of staffing it, and insurance, heat and light and all of that, because they're looking around and they're seeing that some other places who went down that road are now maybe struggling to sustain the centre.
How ready do you think regional and local government are ready for the challenge of these kinds of detailed negotiations and just the freedom to do deals, which is often what these community groups are looking for?
Yeah, it's see we have some good examples of it, of transfers of one form or another, but they have been kind of ad hoc. So I don't think there's a readiness across the systems to do it in a kind of strategic and planned way. It has tended to happen whenever communities have needed to do something. They have already got established relationships with, in most cases you're talking about whoever owns the site or owns the building. They have a good relationship there. There's some element of win-win going to happen by transferring it to the community. It might be that they can attract investment that the statutory public body that owns the site or the building can't attract that. Often that's the case. And there's some kind of a win-win happens. And that's identified by people who have a bit of foresight, and it's worked through by people who already have got good relationships.
So it's ad hoc, and it depends on
the
activism, if you like, of the people bringing the idea to the table.
Aye, and the receptiveness of having a good civil servant or official with a bit of foresight and commitment to the community.
And yet in Northern Ireland here, there are a whole bunch of assets that are kind of potentially up for grabs. I'm thinking of the former army barracks spaces right across Northern Ireland. Now that's a case where potentially government has identified a potential asset, but as one of my previous correspondents or respondents said this morning, an asset, a physical building is not necessarily an asset.
No.
So, in kind of larger scale cases like this, what's the challenge there?
Well, I think like in those larger ones, I don't imagine any of those are going to be transferred to communities. They might get bits and pieces of them. And like any situation, they need to be very clear that they're not taking on a liability. And I think, well, I'm sure actually, community and volunteer organisations are much more far-sighted than maybe we were 10 or 20 years ago. Like few would now rush into taking on the responsibilities of a building, which is usually what we're talking about, without being fairly careful and sure that they could financially sustain it in the years to come.
What do you think's brought that caution about?
Well, I suppose we're all conscious that there's less funding about now than there used to be, particularly revenue. And, the message is kind of getting across that you need to be looking a wee bit further ahead and finding ways of sustaining community facilities or community buildings is more difficult than maybe we once thought it was.
Are there any examples you can think of where people have been fairly creative or used kind of new approaches to deal with that revenue problem as opposed to the capital investment?
I mean, the examples, I think quite a lot of the examples tend to be around childcare, funny enough, or providing training. Or recreation is also an example. But it's so those are examples, and I think there's some trends there that you can follow. Other kind of successes have been where the community facility is providing a service that's a niche in that community. Nobody else is doing it. It's something.
For example,
the Healthy Living Centre, I'm just in my head, like in the Marine Shaking Centre in the Lower Falls. It's very clear. It was always very clear about what it wanted to do. It was always very focused on health and well-being, and had some good relationships within the health and social services field, and has strengthened those over the years. Has attracted investment into the area from the likes of the big lottery fund that statutory bodies couldn't have attracted, and has kind of stuck to the knitting, as to say, it's been very clear that that's what it's about.
Yeah, sticking to the knitting, being keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, yes, and don't drift from your mission. Don't start to play about with different things.
One thing I'd just like to do before we wrap up is to probe this idea. Now, Belfast has a recent history of civil strife, and particularly working class populations' identities separating geographically.
Sure.
Traditionally, we've got what's left of an infrastructure of leisure centres that were kind of posited in safe areas, so to speak. To what extent is this really just replicating some of those old patterns, or are they actually breaking out?
Within Belfast, I mean, there are one or two really good examples of communities coming together to develop a common facility, but there are few.
Can you give us one just to finish with?
Well, the big one is, of course, the Suffolk and Leonardon one. There are others kind of around. We did some work on interfaces across the city recently, and there's one link that people agreed that they're going to jointly work on, but I can't just say where it is at the minute.
Good man. Okay, thanks, Colm, very much.